Now, in this video, I want to take us to a slightly alternate reality, to one where in the Star Wars franchise, the character of Luke Skywalker is and always has been a woman, and where the character of Rey is now being portrayed by a young man, and then discuss how the sequel trilogy would be viewed right now if everything else, both in the Star Wars franchise and in our world, was exactly the same. In other words, would some fans still dislike the character of Rey if he were a young man? And how would people feel if female Luke had lost her way and been portrayed the way male Luke was in The Last Jedi? And yes, I know some of you might want to immediately make the argument that if Luke Skywalker had been a young woman in the original trilogy back in the late 70s and early 80s, it wouldn't have been as successful and Star Wars wouldn't be what it is today. But that's something I completely disagree with for a lot of reasons. But I'll only touch on it very briefly because I could make an entire series of videos on why Star Wars became the most beloved film franchise in history, and none of those reasons are because Luke is a male character. In fact, Luke in A New Hope is the proverbial everyman character, or every person character if you prefer, or the one we're supposed to relate to the most or the easiest. We can, in a sense, insert ourselves into the story through him because he's experiencing much of this universe for the first time along with us, and he asks the questions we ourselves would ask. An example of this would be when Obi-Wan mentions the Force for the first time, and Luke echoes the Force, because he's never heard of it, which then allows Obi-Wan to launch into a string of exposition that teaches both Luke and us what the Force is exactly. And when you think about the first Star Wars movie, now referred to as A New Hope though, once it was just called Star Wars, Luke is mostly just there, blundering along and asking questions until the end of the movie where he makes a 1-in-a-million shot and becomes a hero. Sure, he also played a part in the rescue of Princess Leia, but as Leia herself points out, they essentially let them all go so they could track the ship back to the Rebel base. But as the original trilogy goes on, we find ourselves growing and learning more about this character, and because we're essentially experiencing the story through him, his failures, like those in The Empire Strikes Back, hit us harder, which makes his ultimate victory in Return of the Jedi feel all the more rewarding or satisfying, because we've gone on this adventure with him. And frankly, if Luke had been a woman, I don't think it would have mattered because the story was done right, which is all that really matters to us, because subconsciously we attached ourselves to the character of Luke Skywalker regardless of his gender. Which is what the character of Rey in the sequel trilogy is also supposed to do regardless of her gender. She's supposed to be the one we, the audience, connect with and experience the story through, the one we grow with and cheer for and celebrate with in the end when she's ultimately victorious in some respect. Which is why I was extremely puzzled when Kathleen Kennedy, president of Lucasfilm, said that she didn't think women could relate to Luke Skywalker in the original trilogy, and that Rey would be a character they could relate to. And the problems with her saying this are many, but most glaring is that it seems to imply that since women couldn't relate to Luke, at least according to her, men should now not be able to relate to Rey, though, as I just argued, if a character is done right, the gender should be almost irrelevant, and the entire audience should be able to make a connection, and usually we do it subconsciously. And I dare say a franchise like Star Wars, that has broad appeal and a massive fan base, should go out of its way to try and create main characters that everyone and anyone can relate to. And yet Kennedy basically is saying that Rey, our new main character, is being made just for female fans. And to be clear, since no doubt some will try to twist my words here, I'm not saying that the new main character shouldn't have been a young woman. As I've pointed out in other videos, the Force chooses beings completely at random. This is a long established fact in the Star Wars universe. So there was essentially a 50-50 shot that the Force would pick a woman, which it did. So any true Star Wars fan who understands the lore will have absolutely no problem with this. And if you go back to before The Force Awakens even came out and kicked off this new trilogy, no one was complaining that Rey was our new main character. In fact, I dare say there was a lot of excitement for her, especially since many thought she'd end up being the daughter of Luke Skywalker. It was only after the first movie came out that some started to criticize Rey, and this scrutiny only intensified after The Last Jedi came out, and it was revealed that Rey was not of any special lineage, which would have, in their eyes, made her a more intricate part of an ongoing, soon-to-be, 9-part story. Of course, though, there were those who wanted to interpret this to mean that some fans couldn't accept that a woman had become powerful all on her own without special parents to explain her ability, even though the real issue is that Rey has become stronger and more proficient with the Force faster than any other character we've ever seen before, with no explanation greater than the dark side was stronger, so a counterbalance was needed on the light side. Which, for those who know the lore, completely contradicts what Yoda once said about how the dark side was the quicker, easier path. because now the light side can just make you ultra powerful on a whim without any of the potential pitfalls, like falling to the dark side. And ironically enough, essentially blessing her with this power that she has not struggled to master is not only a contradiction to what the light side has always represented, which is patience amongst a great many other things, but does more to discredit her as a strong character than anything else. Because, again, she is not shown struggling to master these abilities at any point, and one of the ways people can relate to characters, even those in incredible scenarios, like is all too often the case with Star Wars, is through their struggles. And if the people who are quick to criticize the naysayers of Rey would actually listen to the complaints levied against her, and not begin and end the argument with, they must be sexist, they would hear the biggest issue critics of Rey have is they cannot relate to a character that is given all this power, has little if any difficulty mastering it, and is always victorious in the end. This is the simple reason why Rey fails as a character for some fans, and if Rey were a man, the complaints against him would be virtually identical. Just look at the prequels for a moment, and how criticized the character of Anakin Skywalker was by some fans, as well as Hayden Christensen, the actor who played him in episodes 2 and 3. Never once, however, did anyone jump to the ridiculous conclusion that he was being judged so harshly because he was a male character. Yet when it's the other way around, and a female character is now being harshly criticized, somehow the only answer that makes sense becomes, it must be because fans can't accept a woman. When in reality, Star Wars fans have a track record of rejecting characters they think are poorly handled. Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi is another example of a character that some fans thought was destroyed, and they weren't afraid to criticize that either. And if you think the outrage would have been any different in an alternate reality where Luke had been a woman, you truly don't understand Star Wars fans. Because most fans were upset over Luke because they saw it as a tearing down of an icon. A character they'd once gone on an incredible journey with was now essentially being used to do little more than to push a new character that they couldn't relate to. And if that new character had been a young man, and the beloved long-standing character had been an older woman, the backlash from the fanbase would have been the same. The only difference is, there would have been those who took exception to a young man showing up an older woman. And therein lies the true problem right now. You can't just make a movie anymore or create a character without worrying how it'll all be perceived in the context of the real world, which seems utterly ridiculous in a series of movies called Star Wars, where the central theme, to put it very simply, is about evil space wizards versus good space wizards who are trying to either conquer or save a galaxy. A premise that is so wild and out there that one of the only reasons it really does work is because you can, or should be able to, relate to the characters in this fantastic setting. And once you start creating characters that are meant to represent or address very specific real-world issues, you rip people out of the story and bring them back down to earth, which is the exact opposite reason of why they're watching in the first place. Instead of being entertained, they feel as if they're being lectured to by people who, for whatever reason, feel they have some sort of righteous obligation to correct the perceived wrongs of our world in a movie called Star Wars, which I hope sounds as insane for you to hear as it is for me to say. In closing here, the only ones who make a big deal out of Rey's gender are the ones who, before the movies ever started even coming out, had an agenda for her that went beyond just being a good character in a good series of movies, and those who now want to belittle those who do have legitimate complaints against her by marginalizing them and calling them sexist because they don't like the character. Because the thing is, Rey should have been made for all fans, not just female ones. She should have been made relatable for anyone and everyone who watched her, not just those who share her gender. And the funny part is, that's what all of us Star Wars fans, men and women alike, wanted her to be. We didn't care about her gender. We just wanted her to take us on another thrilling adventure in a galaxy far, far away, one with highs and lows, victories and defeats, and with an ending that left us feeling inspired. And for some fans, she has indeed been just that. But for others, she simply hasn't, and they shouldn't be attacked for not being moved by a character in a fictional story. From their point of view, the message Rey sends is not a relatable one on any level, because they see a character that has been just gifted with the ability to use the Force extremely well, and there was absolutely no learning curve shown at all. And in the real world, very few, if any of us, just have some innate talent that requires absolutely no honing at all. Instead, success at most things in life almost always requires hard work, practice, and perseverance after we initially fail. And to imply it'll be otherwise is to set people up for disappointment and failure. I mean, Michael Jordan wasn't the best basketball player in the world the very first time he touched a basketball. George Lucas didn't happen to pick up a camera one day and create Star Wars. And Rey, whether it would have been a male or female character, shouldn't have been the most powerful Force user we've ever seen the first time she touched a lightsaber. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Would Rey be viewed any differently if it were a male character? And how would people have reacted if a female Luke had been portrayed the way male Luke was in The Last Jedi? Leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.